Hello and welcome to our web chat on Swift GPI for Corporates. We are joined by Christof Hofmann, Global Head of Payments and Collection Products at Deutsche Bank, who's shaping Deutsche's payment offering and is engaged in key initiatives like PSD2, instant payments, and Swift GPI. We will be examining the progress of probably the most important development in payments today. But first, we're going to be examining what are the momentum that Swift GPI is building up. Christof, can you explain?
Jack, thanks a lot first for inviting me to this web chat. I'm happy to be here. Looking at this slide, you can see that the momentum of Swift GPI across the whole industry has picked up tremendously. On the left-hand chart, you see GPI volumes are growing quickly, while Swift still reported 100,000 payments between GPI banks a day in December 2017. Now in June, we have already reached 400,000 payments per day, and there are now over 100 billion US dollar daily sent via Swift GPI. So where does this growth come from? This growth is a result clearly of additional banks going live, or as well of live banks increasing their volumes. As of now, there are 65 banks live with Swift GPI, and more than 120 banks are in implementation. We at Deutsche Bank are live since October 2017, and we're using the so-called default approach, which means any eligible payment which we can send via GPI, we do as well send via GPI. Volumes are interesting, but difficult for you to relate to from your personal experience in business. So let's look at the GPI penetration in the middle column here. As of June, more than 25% of all Swift customer payments globally are sent on GPI, and roughly half of those are as well received by a GPI bank and therefore end-to-end traceable via GPI. This is not the same for all corridors. There are some corridors, like for example, US-China, which is a very important corridor, where those numbers are significantly higher, and Swift GPI accounts for more than 50% of the payments in this payment corridor. What is very important is that we will see huge boost in the GPI penetration ahead. In November 2018, there is something called the Swift Standards release. And from this point onward, any bank is required to include the unique identifier, which is the prerequisite for GPI tracking, in their payment instruction. And this will result in a massive increase of traceability. I don't want to go into the technical details now how this will exactly work, but the effect of it is ultimately that GPI payment will continue to be traceable, even if a bank in the middle or at the end is not itself a GPI bank and GPI compliant. So we really can guarantee and have this end-to-end traceability starting with the standards release in November 2018. Moving on to the right, the other key questions always asked by corporate treasurers and the community alike is, what does this do to the speed of payment? If you look at the statistics here, you see that cross-border payments with GPI are pretty fast. There are 35% of the payments are settled within 5 minutes. And if you go up to half an hour, it even amounts to 49%. And to be clear, we're talking here about cross-border payments, so payments between different corridors, and this is the time it takes until the funds are with the beneficiary and confirmed to be in the beneficiary account. Still, that means as well that 51% of the payments still take more than 30 minutes, but very often there are good reasons for this. So those are reasons, it can be due to document checks required or FX controls in certain corridors, where sometimes as well the corporate still needs to provide information, or it's simply due to time zone differences. So clearly banks and the industry should work on further accelerating payments, but overall I think it's the first time those elapsed times are measurable, and it's already a quite impressive achievement of the industry and takes a bit away the notion of cross-border payments take days and are slow. Talking about the Deutsche Bank experience, it's very similar to what we see here, but I wanted to pick out a few examples to show it can be even faster. So for example, there was a US dollar payment from the US to the UK, which took 45 seconds, or a euro payment from Germany to the UK within 1 minute. those are not the fastest examples. There are even faster ones, but I just wanted to pick out two. So cross-border payments are fast nowadays.
Does this mean that the speed of payments has improved, or does it just mean we know what's happening much more clearly?
That's a very interesting question, actually, a question heavily debated, Jack. So clearly, there are service level agreements in place now, which guarantee the same-day availability of funds if received before cutoff by the beneficiary bank. So I think there is for sure an impact of payments have gotten faster now. But there is as well the effect that we just in the past were never able to measure the speed of a payment end to end, to really say how long those payments take on average. With Swift GPI, for the first time, the industry is able to measure this number. And I think there is as well some element of the payments maybe have always been faster than we anticipate. So long answer, I think it's a combination of both.
Yeah, but it exposes the slow players because you can now see it in detail.
Yeah, it's as well. It's not only the service level agreement; it's as well the exposure of the slow players, as you said. Suddenly, the industry notices, and people try to change it.
Right. Moving on and looking at the evolution of Swift GPI, and it really is an evolution both within the banks and between banks and the corporates. Can you talk us through this? Because the final stage is starting to show some real potential.
I fully agree, Jack, and I think there is some real interesting opportunity here for corporate treasurers. But let me start on the left-hand side and explain a bit this chart. So what we have depicted here is on the y-axis is the value to corporate. So clearly GPI, even in the first stage here shown as A, has a big value to corporate treasurers and to the industry as such. The ability to exit already this step brings value because it shows increased speed and transparency. We have all the benefits we talked about before. We have as well transparency on deduct, which means we know if the principal amount of payment is reduced, how much has it been reduced by which bank in the payment chain, and it's a big achievement already. We are live SDB since October 2017 with GPI and support this. However, to be clear as well, this does not yet include any self-service capability. So it means a corporate treasurer or anybody needs to contact the bank to find out, has the beneficiary been credited? Are the funds already there? Or how fast was the payment? Or what's the reason for the deduct? This need to contact the treasurer and find out on a bespoke basis goes away with the next phase. So here shown as B, that's where the bank provides all the information via bank portal. For Deutsche Bank, this portal is called Cash Inquiry. It's on the Autobahn app market, and it includes the full real-time visibility of any status changes until the beneficiary has been credited. It includes as well full transparency on the deducts taken, and it's important to note maybe on the deducts, this providing the information on deducts is optional to banks to provide it to corporates at least, or to end clients. It's a mandatory feature of the GPI scheme, but the provisioning to corporates or other clients is not mandatory.
So you're saying that the banks are differentiating by whether they make this service available or not?
So there are two things. First, and I come to that in a second, not each bank has a portal. So not each bank has this portal at all. But even the banks which have a portal, and in general, there is some optionality for banks to provide as well the information on deducts to corporates. The information on the payment status is mandatory and needs to be provided. The information on deducts is an optional field. Banks can choose to give this transparency to corporates or not. And we as Deutsche Bank have chosen to give full transparency to the corporates and share really any information which is available to us. We share as well via this Autobahn Cash Inquiry app with our customers.
Okay, so this new stage, the new testing stage you're in with C, why is that important?
That is important because clearly many of the large corporates are multi-bank corporates, right? They having access to a portal is great, and we have fantastic feedback by our clients. And for people interested in more detail on this portal, there is as well another article on CTMfile, which my colleague Martin Bruno published on 13th of July. So look at it, have a look. It includes as well a screenshot of the portal. But if I'm a corporate treasurer and I'm a multi-bank corporate, so I work with 5 to 10 banks, I don't want to access 5 different portals, have a lot of tokens lying around, and really basically always look at individual payments. What I really want to have is having a multi-bank capability, having something directly in my ERP or TMS system, having full visibility across banks, and the full transparency at the fingertip in my fully embedded in my operational processes. And that's what C here brings to the corporates and brings live. And there was a swift press release last week as well announcing this new service. What has happened is that 10 corporates, 12 banks, and Swift have partnered up, develop an enhanced value proposition for corporates around Swift GPI. So that means really exactly allowing this ERP TMS integration, enabling full analytics, creating as well first a standard which allows corporates and banks to communicate with each other. All that has been achieved already. It's a closed user group, and in the closed user group, this service will already go live in October 2018, and more to come around that.
The important feature I felt of this new initiative is that it's process standardization as well as standard format agreement. How is that being received?
I think I agree with you, Jack. That's a big step, right? It requires both. It requires first the standard formats, because otherwise the whole integration in ERP and TMS system can become very messy. Banks and corporates have partnered to define the standard format, to agree what information is important for corporates, and to ensure this information is provided. And then clearly from a process point of view, that is embedded there as well. There are clear agreements how the update to corporates will work. And there's as well in close partnership with the respective vendors already in this stage, where certain vendors are involved to help corporates really embed this into their operational procedures.
The final question really here on this initiative, making the service available within ERPs and TMSs, is you've got 10 corporates already testing it. When are you allowing new companies to join this? Because it's clearly a great benefit.
So we are, as mentioned, testing now with those 10 corporates. There will be another phase which has to be defined by Swift and this pilot group, which are the early adopters, where another around 10 corporates will come on board and additional banks as well over the next few months. And then we expect a more open setting and a more productionalized service for the whole community to start around, I would expect the first half of 2019. That's when I expect this to become more widely available.
This is really important stuff. And the final question is, how do we exploit this, we the corporates exploit this opportunity? Because it really will change the way we do business, I think, not just how we do payments, but the way we do business.
Sure, happy to explain it, Jack. And I fully agree, this will really change the way, because it is a complete new user experience for corporate treasurers and their teams. So let me explain a bit how to exploit it. There is one big difference which is important to note when we talk about the service, the basic GPI service, or the accessing the GPI information via bank portal. This does not require any change on the corporate side, and a corporate can just leverage the benefits and doesn't need to do any investment on their side or any change on their side. With this stronger integration into the ERP system, this looks a bit different. And I will first maybe walk you through the steps below to explain how this service will work, and then as well what it means for corporate. So in the first step, how this will work is that the corporate generates a payment instruction. as a MT101 or as well later in 2019 as a payment 001, because XML is more or less the second step in this process and includes in this payment instruction when sending to its bank already a unique identifier, the so-called UETR. Because this UETR is really what is used to make payments trackable and traceable. All this works via providing information to a cloud which is hosted by Swift. The so-called GPI tracker here shown on this chart. Now, if Deutsche Bank receives this payment instruction, and Deutsche Bank ensures that when we send the payment on to the next intermediary bank, that is being done with an MT103 format, the typical format used here, that we use the same UETR and in this payment instruction. And then then the usual process starts, which already happens today. Every bank involved updates the tracker, provides additional information to the tracker, being it on payment status or being it on payment deducts. With the Swift standard release, as mentioned, even if the bank cannot update the tracker, the respective information can still be leveraged as extracted directly from the Swift message. So there is full transparency on the trace and traceability there. Now, what happens next in order to ensure the corporate really has the information in the ERP system is step 4 shown here, that Deutsche Bank pulls the transaction status from the tracker via an API. So we get all the information there, and it has been agreed that for certain status changes, we will report back to the corporate via an MT199 or then in the future via payment 002. So with formats many corporates already use today, they get standardized updates on the payment, which again includes the full wealth of information, not only the status, but as well deducts, the routing which has been used with the intermediary banks, etc. So the full transparency is provided here back to the corporate. And then after step 5, available in the ERP system and to be used for payment monitoring, for analytics, and for different purposes. On the top of the chart, you again see the timelines for this pilot as mentioned. Now go live in the closed user group planned for October, and in 2019, the wider adoption of this service.
This is really attractive, but you're already discussing new services that go beyond this. Can you give us an idea of the sort of things that are being considered?
Yes, happy to make a few points around that. So, for example, one thing going live as well in November 2018 already is the so-called stop and recall service. So that allows to use GPI to stop an in-flight payment. So let's assume you've noticed there has been a mistake in the payment instruction or fraudulent payment or anything else changed it and you want to stop a payment. In November 2018, there will be a stop and recall service which allows to stop this payment. And then it depends again on the bank. For Deutsche Bank, this service will as well be available as of November in our cash inquiry app. That means you don't need to call anybody, but you can go into the cash inquiry app and then use this service. For the Swift for Corporates here, I expect this will be discussed in the community as well. It has not yet happened, but that is clearly the next step because that any service which is offered via GPI can as well be triggered via the ERP system directly. There are a few more things being discussed. At the moment, the GPI is mostly used for when you send payments. There is a proof of value being conducted currently to assess what's the benefit of having more transparency on the receivable side. So to basically know already of in-flight payments where you are the beneficiary before they hit your account. So there are lots of additional topics being discussed at the community to really continue the GPI service and the journey there. It's not the end to it. And then it's really by 2020, end of 2020, it is anticipated that all 10,000 banks on the GPI network will support GPI service, and it will be a complete 100% traceability and transparency achieved by that point. But I think nobody has to wait that long because already at the moment, we have a massive ramp up and a massive benefit.
The question always is, from a corporate's point of view, is what do I have to do to my internal systems to make the changes? Because I listened to one corporate saying, it takes longer than you think.
It depends how you want to use it. If you think about the previous slide, for the first phase on the left-hand side, to just benefit from the faster service, you don't need to do anything. That is just, we as Deutsche Bank send any payment as GPI, no client needs to instruct us, nothing needs to happen, so that's the basic service, no need to do anything. If you already use the portal of a bank and the bank decides to add GPI tracking to this portal, then you don't need to do anything either. You have this visibility straight away. If you want to, however, participate in the SWIFT for Corporate service, which we just discussed, then you really need to do some work. Then you need to work with your ERP or TMS system provider to enable your system to generate this unique identifier, and to as well consume the status updates and make it usable for you. Good news here is really that many of the providers are already looking into this and are already proactively developing their products and dashboards, etc. So many corporates will just as well get it as part of their upgrades of the ERP or TMS system.
Just stepping back a bit, how would you describe GPI's overall impact?
I think the impact of GPI is pretty massive, and it is for both the corporate to bank relationship, but as well the relationship between banks. The system which in the past has not been very transparent, let's be fair, cross-border payments were not transparent because the information was not there. I mentioned before, even banks didn't know how long a payment took. It's suddenly extremely transparent. It's much easier to track service levels, to make banks comparable. And we know as well from some of the corporates we talk to and some of the corporates we interact with in the corporate pilot, that this benefit is not to be underestimated. Having this full transparency is key, and it really streamlines and simplifies the processes of many corporates. I think one thing I would note as a takeaway for corporates is talk to your banks if they're not live on GPI already, that they should support GPI. And then when it comes to an RFP you launch in this area, don't only think about does your bank support GPI, but how does your bank support GPI? Do they provide all the information, including deducts, or limit it to the bare minimum, as this is optional, as mentioned before? And can you access the information in some way, or would you need to call a client service officer? Ideally, they offer you a portal or even participate or plan to participate in the SWIFT for Corporate service.
So your overall summary is the impact is going to be huge. Thank you very much. Most interesting and really important.